Hello and welcome to the show. I'm your host, Jason Knight, and on each episode of this podcast, I'll be having inspiring conversations with passionate product people. If you're a passionate product person or happen to know a few, I'd love it if you could share this episode with them and subscribe or rate and review the podcast on the podcast app of your choice. On tonight's episode, we'll be speaking about delivery. No, not your Amazon parcels. We're talking about product delivery. We'll be talking about how to use data to inform your delivery decisions, how you should use story points for absolutely everything, and why it's more important to concentrate on the results you deliver than getting so hung up on the ins and outs of the framework that you've chosen. We'll also talk about how our guest has used some of these techniques not just to succeed at work, but also to succeed in his up-and-coming band. For all this and much more, please join us on One Night in Product. So my guest tonight is James Rooney, up-and-coming indie musician and band manager, F1 fan, champion of data-informed decisions and looking to apply story points to just about everything. Delivery manager at Discovery Inc. Also specifically calls out VLOOKUP as a LinkedIn skill, so I'm hoping he's going to excel at this interview.
Oh.
Hi James, how are you doing?
Yeah, I was good until that joke.
You do have to realise that's about my level these days.
It's great, I'm only joking.
So, anyone that keeps pressing up for long enough on the remote control will have a good understanding of Discovery. But in your own words, who are Discovery and what problem do they solve?
Yeah, so Discovery, I mean, a lot of people know Discovery Channel. And at the moment, we're kind of bringing everything onto our VOD offering, which is Discovery Plus. So Discovery Plus launched pretty much worldwide on the 5th of Jan. So we're bringing all the kind of non-scripted dramas. So, so your TLCs, your 90 Day Fiancés, Love Islands. So we're filling that gap. We don't really fill the Netflix gap. We fill the gap of that kind of nice entertainment perspective and more to come. We've got the Olympics for the summer, so that should be pretty cool. So it's pretty good.
That does sound good. And you're a delivery manager for Discovery.
Yeah.
So what's your day job there and what are you specifically delivering?
So I am the delivery manager for the expansion side of delivery. So what I do is any program that's across EMEA, I kind of drive the delivery teams for that at the moment. So, for example, Discovery and Dplay were kind of the same thing, and we've just rebranded all the Dplay sites into Discovery Plus. So there was a whole replatforming and redesign of a load of technologies for the Discovery Plus launch, and I was driving that. And I'm on the future kind of expansion projects as well.
And was that your kind of history from before? Were you working in some of this sort of video on demand and other sort of related technologies before, or was kind of Discovery your first entry point to that?
No, I've worked in VOD before. So I worked for a company called Osmodern. So that was doing things for Sky and Formula One and, TV Academy doing the Emmy Awards. So I'm kind of used to working on big kind of VOD platforms. And that's probably the reason why I'm at Discovery, for being quite experienced at that. And
I guess that's obviously got some similarities with, say, building, say, SaaS platforms and stuff like that, because I'm assuming that you're building SaaS platforms to deliver it, but I'm assuming there's a lot of back-end stuff that has to kind of feed that as well. So how much more complicated does that make your job?
For my job, it's relatively simple. It's back-end developers and front-end developers and DevOps and content creators. They all work from story points. They're all working with us in Jira. We're still having retros. We still have planning. So the processes don't change, just the people change and the terminology changes rather than the process. So it's not actually too bad, but there's a lot going on. As you can imagine, a company the size of Discovery is pretty big. So there's a lot of different personalities and a lot of things to manage.
Yeah, and I was going to say, so you kind of touched on the team thing there, and I'm assuming that you're working in some form of cross-functional team, as you kind of just touched on.
Yeah.
But do your responsibilities mainly encompass just one team and just working with them on a subset, or are you there to coordinate across multiple teams and kind of bring everything together?
Yeah, it's multiple teams, multiple platforms, so connected, Android, iOS, web, all the big players in that perspective, multiple developers across multiple teams. So that I kind of bring together that whole delivery aspect. I'm quite lucky to work with a really good product manager who does a lot of the more config, let's say, editorial side. So he takes a lot of the planning from that perspective, but it's more the technical delivery of those solutions is what I do.
Okay, and I was going to ask, actually, obviously, As a product guy myself, and obviously really interested in the sort of interplay between product and other parts of the team. So you said you've got a good product manager, and that's obviously brilliant. And of course, all product managers should be good. But how does that work sort of day to day? Have you got quite good handoffs and separation of responsibilities? Do you all kind of just muck in on whatever comes up, or is it a very positive relationship generally?
Yeah, it's really, really positive. We've got really clear roles at Discovery where the product owner takes quite a hands-on involvement in the ticket writing. So often he'll write the tickets and then I'll kind of check them and make sure they meet our definitions of ready and stuff like that. And I guess from my perspective is that they're a little bit technical. So they kind of know, the tweaks are very small and in my pedantic, this needs a design. It can't just be linked to that ticket, that kind of thing. So it makes, considering we had to do something like 300, 400 tickets in the space of 2 or 3 months, when your ticket review is quite quick, it really, really helps deliver that product. And I think he was a big part of that. So it was really good.
And how about the developers? So one of the things and the trends that I've seen online in blog posts and other community posts and things like that is, so in some cases you kind of have a very militant strand of sort of developer who are sitting there saying, we don't need product managers, we don't need delivery people, we don't need scrum masters, we don't need any of that. Just let the developers develop and we'll develop you something great. Now, I personally don't agree with that, but do you have any of that kind of attitude at your side, or do you, again, have quite a good positive relationship with the technical staff as well?
Yeah, to be honest, I've never really seen that from any development team that I've worked in. One of the first things I like to do is kind of get in and learn who people are and how they respond to different things. So I'd like to think that quite quickly they see the value that people like myself add, and we're there to, primarily solve problems for them. And another thing that I kind of do is I'm not super regimented on every ticket has to be an essay. If there's enough if there's enough details and the developer says, yeah, I get this, just for the sake of being a bit more complete for an arbitrary, 9 more layers of text, I don't believe in that. So I think they kind of get the fact that, they've got the responsibility to say that ticket's enough. And also they feel comfortable quite quickly in saying, actually, this is not enough. Can you go back and get X, Y, Z from, ABC? So I've tended to have quite a good relationship. I don't really see that myself, though I could understand it in some scenarios.
Yeah, I think it depends which communities and what kind of shell shock people are recovering from. But it's definitely commentary that I've seen. And obviously, as again a dyed-in-the-wool product guy, I'm always sitting there chomping at the bit to correct them.
Yeah, I think maybe more from product side. I can see, sometimes it's if they don't 100% get involved in too much detail of the grooming of the tickets, then there's just a guy that says, well, why does this have to be a bit darker blue? I can kind of get why some of those frustrations might come out of developers. But again, it's nothing that I've really seen. Or if I have seen it, it's never been such an issue that I would remember it in the conversation like this.
Fair enough. It sounds like a happy shop. So do you use any particular Agile methodologies? I mean, story points seem to imply that you're using some form of Scrum. So are you using Scrum? And if so, how by the book are you going with that?
Yeah, I mean, we're kind of using an element of Scrumban. It's kind of a little bit more organized than Kanban. But my personal approach is that everything adapts to the company and the people within it. Stand-ups aren't there unless the devs get value out of them. Retrospectives aren't there, just for the sake of it. So, we do retrospectives, grooming, stand-ups. Really keen on making the stand-ups as short as possible. No point telling us what you did yesterday for ages. It's a really clear, 1 minute, maximum 2 minute for people. So we follow those kind of guidelines quite strict. But in terms of how we run our retrospectives, how we run our demos, we kind of bend and adapt to what the business needs and that kind of stuff. I would say from a process perspective, we're strict on story points because, in my opinion, and as you kind of know, I absolutely love story points, and their value is massive. So everything that we can get story points, and I'm really, really strict on that. Everything else ebbs and flows.
Have you ever tried any other types of methodology or any other type of approach other than sort of the classic sort of Scrum or Scrumban, maybe even Kanban? But obviously there are a bunch of other different approaches out there. Have you ever tried to dabble in any of those, or you're kind of sticking to the classics? No,
I've ran some stuff in Waterfall before. I used to do kind of but that was more of a construction project for an art company. So it made, although there were Agile advantages to doing that stuff, it made more sense with the stakeholders to stick to what they knew. And also, pre-story point revelation, I've tried t-shirt sizes, which don't work, and days, which don't work. And so, I've experimented with a few, but the one I haven't seen fail yet when implemented right is story points. And that's maybe a pretty strong statement. But, I use story points to run social campaigns at an art company, story points to run my own music writing, and deliver EPs and albums, and story points to do software projects. And once everyone's on the same page, it doesn't really matter what a free is, just that everyone who's involved in saying free understands in their own head what a free is.
Yeah, that's fair enough. One thing that you can also see in companies, and I've certainly seen in companies, is that the Scrum Master role can be seen as kind of a luxury, and sometimes maybe it ends up being played by the product owner themselves, or someone else on the team, or it's a part-time thing, or it's just seen as a kind of an add-on. Now, obviously, that runs counter to the sort of Scrum fundamentals, which seem to be very opinionated on that. But have you seen that before? And even if not, do you think that that's a valid approach, or do you think that it should be a very distinct role?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I've been a sole Scrum Master for small teams. I've been the sole Scrum Master for like medium-sized teams, and I've been a Scrum Master stroke delivery manager hybrid, and then delivery manager. So I guess it kind of depends on the relationships you've got with people. I think there's an easy way for Scrum Masters to almost be seen to be a bit like sitting on the laurels and just watching, and that stakeholders can sometimes misunderstand that the value of watching isn't just sitting there playing on a Facebook game. They're actually trying to understand the behavioral traits. When you could be in an office, trying to understand the behavioral traits and how people are, and making sure you get the best out of them, and spot when the mood starts to change, and then you can react really quickly to that mood changing from being the sole Scrum Master. But I think as quite an ambitious person myself, being quite a sole Scrum Master, you do end up having space to do other things that naturally gets you, if you want to be, a bit more into the delivery, a bit more into the financial forecasting, a little bit more into the CR writing, which is kind of where I ended up. So I think there's no one size fits all, but in my experience, there's advantages of both.
Yeah, I think that the problem that I've seen when you have the product person being the Scrum Master, for example, as well, is that they're kind of almost, they're not oppositional roles, but they have different, or they should have different priorities. So the product owner shouldn't necessarily be doing everything, or their whole priority shouldn't just be the working of the team. They obviously need the team to work, but their priority is making a really good product. And in many ways, that kind of sometimes runs counter, or can run counter to some of the things that maybe the Scrum Master would then push back on. For example, about getting some scope reduced, or making sure that everything fits into the sprint and stuff like that, and trying to get some kind of order to the chaos.
Yeah, I guess my problems like that were really quite easy because I'm so, if you're listening now and you haven't picked up, because I love story points, our capacity and our bucket was known. It's really easy to share that information wide. So once the team estimates something as being 30 points and you've only got space to do 20 points, the conversation, whether it's yourself wearing two different hats, or you're in a meeting in front of the CEO and then a meeting with your development managers or whatever, you are still talking about the same 20 points, 30, and everyone understands that once everyone understands the process. So I guess that's one of the advantages I've had of being quite data-driven and recently data-informed, after I think I quite like your terminology of being data-informed rather than driven. So that's one of the big advantages that I've seen on that. So yes, you do wear multiple hats, but if you're all looking at the same hymn sheet, I've never really seen too much of that kind of cognitive dissonance when fighting between yourself.
Just wait. So there's been a new Scrum guide that's come out end of last year. Obviously been provoking a lot of discussion online. I don't know if you've read it yet, but if you have any thoughts on it, or any thoughts on any improvements, or whatever the opposite of an improvement is?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't read it yet. I've seen some kind of bullet-pointed highlights on it, and it's one of the things I need to catch up on a little bit. But at the same time, I'm a big fan of applying the processes that the business needs to get the business outcome. So I probably wouldn't go back into there unless there was a problem that arose, and I thought, I wonder if the new way has a better solution to what's being provided. So I don't think there's any major problems that I'm having that necessitated a new release of Scrum. I'd done my Agile PM a couple of years ago. I've kind of done the Scrum Master stuff exams are great for sitting in a room for 3 days and learning what the goals are. But every company I've been in has done it slightly differently. And at times, even the companies have changed the way they've done things as you're there. So I haven't read it yet, but anything that gets everyone on the same page tends to help. So yeah, that's my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a danger, and it's certainly something that I've seen in certain forums and in certain discussions of being so fundamentalist that actually the way that you deliver stuff is the most important thing versus the fact that you're delivering stuff. Now, obviously, there needs to be a way to deliver it because you can't just throw everything up in the air. But yeah, I think that any time that you fall completely in love with the fundamental kind of strict rules about how to do things, you're definitely losing that flexibility, which seems to be very un-agile.
Yeah, and I think that's because if I remember right, like Scrum calls for a proper half day of planning. And I know if I got my team together for half a day, after 40 minutes, because we plan so quickly as we're used to now, if we sat in a room for time box 3 or 4 hours, I don't think we'd gain any extra value from stuff. So there is a line, but equally, I haven't read it yet, so I can't comment on its full thing. But anything that it obviously was released for a reason, it must solve something to some people, and if it does, great. And if some people disagree with it, that's probably great as well, because I don't think it's a strict thing. It's a little bit like telling artists that that's not the way you paint. You kind of paint however you need to paint. And the most important thing is that you are happy with the picture and that potentially other people are.
Absolutely. Another thing, though, that you do see online is that there's quite a backlash against Scrum in certain quarters as well.
Yeah.
And indeed in some ways against Agile methodologies at all. Some people just seem to think that all of these different Agile methodologies are just not fit for purpose and that they don't enable you to deliver value. They don't help people develop software and that they're not fit for purpose at all. So, I mean, have you seen that? Have you come across that in your career as both sort of on the Scrum Master side or delivery manager side?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the two things that kind of jump out to me when you kind of say that is I've worked in, like, Scrum doesn't work if the same team that needs to support live issues has to support product development. Obviously, Scrum is meant to be fixed scope, delivering fixed things, and then it all works from there. And a lot of people try and do Scrum, but then expect that same team to fix a live issue if the website goes down or if the product all of a sudden breaks. And I think if you haven't got a dedicated team to deal with support, then Scrum just doesn't work, and you kind of end up in that Scrum ban kind of perspective where you're kind of roughly planning, and then Kanban almost feels too loose. I guess I don't know if there's a name for this yet, but I kind of do like velocity, like the cadence and tracking, so how many points you're going to get in a 2-week period or a 3-week period, or what February is expected to do, and then fill the bucket up and deliver. So I don't know if there's like bucketism. I don't know. Let's make that now. It's just you fill your monthly bucket up of work and you go on and you do stuff like that. But that's been often the failings of Scrum that I've seen is when you say Scrum, all right, well, the scope is fixed. And then 2 days later, someone says, but we need to make this change now. Well, if you want to work Scrum in theory, you can't. And the mental, like the gains that you get from being fixed scope were lost the second you introduce that kind of stuff. So, yeah, it's a bit interesting.
I mean, obviously, you're completely right that kind of unexpected things that occur within those sort of 2-week cycles are obviously really tricky. Now, I know that some people, for example, have advocated, if we know what our velocity is, then maybe only allocate 80% of that so that you've got some overhead for bugs. Now, you seem to be suggesting that you don't agree with that. Is that correct?
I don't think I disagree. I mean, that probably makes perfect sense in their environment. It's one of those things. I can't comment on a rule that they made that worked really well for their environment. perhaps they're just talking about that. That suggests to me that there's a lot of tech debt in their pipeline and they can't just get to work. So maybe the 20% is like a tech debt fixy part of the world, but just not called it. And I would argue that it's still 100%, just 20% is tech debt. And that would be the hint for me to go and look further if someone was telling me that, like if I was in a position. But I think there's loads of different ways of doing that kind of stuff.
So I know that you're keen on a data-informed approach to agile delivery.
Yeah.
And how story points could take over the world. In fact, I first came across you in an Agile Roundabout talk called Predicting the unknown, discussing how by fully utilizing the concept of story points, data can be used to make delivery decisions. Now, that's a catchy title.
Thank you. It took me a while.
I'm assuming it goes above and beyond just having a good-looking burn down.
Yeah.
What are some of your key takeouts and things that we should be doing to use data to inform our delivery decisions?
So I think step one is a lot of companies and a lot of organizations don't realize the data they actually have. So a lot of people use Jira, but then after a month or whatever project they're on, kind of forget that data just sits there waiting to be used. There's a lot to be had from just quickly getting an export of that data, doing a quick pivot table, and just having to play and seeing what your average story point is, what your average work through a month is, how big your average releases are. And those things might not come out, but they can help estimate sizes but certainly when it comes to new biz, and you kind of wonder whether this new biz opportunity is the same as two of these releases or similar to that feature. So there's a lot there that can just be kind of deep dived and started off. And I think a lot of people just don't do it because either they haven't got the time, or it's still the data analysis is still a relatively new skill set. So haven't got the space just to think about it and do it. But yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity to kind of differentiate yourself by understanding that data in delivery.
And are you quite a good analyst yourself, or do you have to kind of offload that onto other people to get you some stats? Like how do you approach the actual analysis of that data?
Yeah, I'd like to think I was a good analyst. I've been I started off doing kind of like big data stuff for Ernst & Young, doing a little bit of analysis on there. And then kind of for the last 8 or 9 years, been a breadth of the new data techniques. I've used like the big tools like Power BI, but I don't think I could ever hold a purely data analyst role in a large company doing large analysts. But from a delivery perspective, I know what a standard deviation is. I know what averages are. As you mentioned at the start, I love a VLOOKUP every now and again to make sure your data is right. So there are certain things there that can be done. But would I say I'm a data expert in terms of actually diving into SQL and doing all that stuff? No. But I know the outputs and enough to get really good delivery information from.
Now, just as a side note, I do believe that I read recently that Excel have overhauled VLOOKUP and they've given it loads of extra new features, and I think it might even be called XLOOKUP now or something like that. So
really,
I recommend you go and have a look at that after this call.
Yeah, to be honest, the last 2 companies I've been at have been using Google Sheets. Google Sheets has come a long way.
Yep.
So I'm in Excel if forced to by a large marketing company. Apart from that, I would be in Google Sheets, which has, to me, 80% of the need that I have, and then 20% on seems to be in their pipeline. They're working on stuff all the time, so I'm sure they'll get there.
Oh yeah, Google Sheets obviously coming on leaps and bounds. But what's one of the best decisions that you've made based off of some data that you've analysed, and how it helped you kind of move the needle on that?
Oh, that's a great question. So actually, probably in Discovery recently. So we've been launching Discovery Plus. And it was kind of, since I joined in October, and I'm very, very vocal about kind of being data-informed, data-driven, and it was fairly new. I think it's fair to say it's fairly new to Discovery as a delivery team. Not the concept of using story points in a team, but then really digging into what story points mean and that data. So one of the first meetings I had with kind of the senior stakeholders was me showing this data graph that showed we were going to be a month and a half late if we didn't take actions. And there was a real whoa moment. Wow, okay, we need to do something about that. And this was 2 or 3 days after we'd started work, because I'd had the ability to look at past data, see who was working on it, make some fair assumptions about what we knew, and then kind of mini model it. That was really bang. And it was the first time in Discovery as a delivery team, normally they'd say, we need an extra developer. Oh, you can't have it. Can you prove it? No. Whereas the argument was so solid, the only option was either be late or find us another developer from somewhere, which was, as a delivery function, was great to be able to say, well, product, senior product director, help us out. What do you want to do with this information? So that was probably really, really powerful. And I saw it at Discovery really making a big difference to the delivery, and also the way that the Discovery think about data in its delivery as well.
So were you late, or did you get an extra developer?
We got an extra developer for the time until the burn down came under, and then handed that developer back to their original team. And we delivered, I think we delivered the day after. We were just behind but for other reasons. But in terms In terms of to launch, we still launched on time, but the internal deadlines we set, I think it was a day after because of a few little pipeline breaks. And it was one of those things where I think Git went down for a day and stuff like that. So, yeah.
It happens.
Yeah, exactly.
Sounds like a positive experience though, and hopefully demonstrated the value. And it's not quite the same context, but there's the old Jeff Bezos quote about don't just come to me with opinions, come to me with data.
Yeah,
I mean he was using it in a kind of a different way, but it's kind of similar.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's a lot of they'll never do this, they won't believe that, which to be fair wasn't really at Discovery, but has been at other places. When someone puts a graph and a piece of paper, and what I'm really keen on doing, and maybe some way that I can kind of help shape other people's delivery, is I try and build everything so that I have my assumptions in like coloured blocks, and then I share my screen or talk people through it. And if any senior stakeholder challenges the assumptions, just by changing like the number of weeks or the velocities, all the reports update straight away. So I can say, oh, okay, well, you actually think velocity is going to increase by 10%. 1 second. That still puts us 10 days behind. Oh, where people just aren't used to having that really quick, like data-driven decisions. So it's not hard. It takes maybe an hour to set up. But when you're walking through it with these kind of senior people who, you've got 40 minutes with them per week because they've got 100 other things to do. And they can say, I think that's wrong. And you go, okay, 1 second, bam, 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 bam. All right, so now we're still negative. Or now we're plus 10. Is that enough? Is that still tight for you? Oh, actually, yeah, it is a little bit. And then you can have real action-based conversations rather than just, actually, last time John did it in 4 days. It eradicates that stuff, so it's quite good. I'm sure sounds like you've had a few, John can do it in 4 days, why can't I? Sounds like you've had a few of them.
Yeah, I think every single product person and every single delivery person has probably had a number of those conversations in their career. So I know that one thing that we chatted about was your passion for music, and obviously you've touched on that a bit yourself earlier on. And obviously, in a don't know if it's fair to say an up and coming band, one that was looking to do some festivals before coronavirus hit. So I've done my time in the past in and around the music industry as well, although maybe slightly less successful. But I think one thing that was really interesting when we chatted was how you suggested that you've taken some of the approaches from your work into your band and presumably then learned some things by managing your band, which have then helped you with your work.
Yeah.
So what are some examples of something that's gone in either direction there?
Yeah, so I think largely is in the marketing and understanding audience insights. So a lot of things about how you can predict what people are going to do and their behavior. And, we kind of went super detailed on, we know our fans are, I think, like 19 years old, based in, let's say, Leeds. So what did 19-year-old Leeds? So we use it to really focus down on that kind of stuff from the kind of traditional, here is data, look at it. But also from an analysis perspective, we know we kind of pull all our information from all our social media platforms into like our own little like data hub. And then we can know when's the best time to post for our fans, when isn't, what kind of content does well, why did this content get 4% engagement more, when to boost, who to boost to, in that kind of way. And also we do it in, we set ourselves, so myself is obviously in delivery. The other guy in the band is in data insight for a large marketing agency. So between the two of us, convincing anyone to use data more just is an easy sell. So, we do our like album planning, our capacity plan for how many songs can we write a month. We know that because we capacity plan, we measure it, we check. Even to like an element of like a quality demo assurance. Won't get that into too much of that now because it's a bit boring per se. We kind of put our own metrics on stuff and then track them. So it's really interesting. Some people would argue that's not what music's about, man, which is totally fair. And however people's creative process works for them. For us, it's what we feel it's using what we have as an advantage in our work to make an advantage in our music. And some of the stuff we're seeing come through that with, more targeted merch sales and stuff like that. So it does have a end product. It's just, sometimes you don't feel like you're switching off from your day job at times.
Well, you don't need to talk to someone who runs a product management podcast to talk about switching off from work.
True.
But I think it's interesting as well, though, because you touched on the kind of the marketing and sort of segmentation use case and stuff, which starts to sound a little bit more applicable to product management because, of course, that's a big part of the product role. So have you ever had any ambitions or kind of had any interest in looking a bit going down that path, or are you very kind of focused on the delivery angle?
Yeah, I've kind of been there. So I used to run a startup where I was very like kind of what before CPO was a popular term. I was kind of the CPO and head of delivery function. So I have done that, and I'm still quite actively involved in what would be affectionately known as side hustles. So I'm still part of that and figuring out different product things around there. Would I be a product manager? Maybe in the future. It would probably have to be. I'd probably have to take a step higher in delivery and then gain more product experience from a strategy-wise rather than day-to-day. I think that's probably where my next steps, if they went into product specifically, would be. But it's really interesting, especially when you speak to people about like feature usage. I think that's such an interesting world. I try and grab my hand on that, knowing that 8% of users use this feature and when do they click on next episode and stuff like that. It's so cool. I mean, I find it so cool. So it's certainly something I'd get into at some point, but maybe not in the next year and a half.
It's interesting, actually. There's this whole fairly on-trend thing in the product world at the moment of kind of product operations as well, which touches a lot on usage and getting the information out that can then inform the product managers to make good product decisions. So we're actually having a chat with someone who works in product ops later this week. So keep them peeled.
Cool.
And on LinkedIn, it says you strive to be recognized as a thought leader.
Yeah.
So hopefully this interview will be part of that journey. But more specifically, when's your first book coming out?
So I'm actually planning 4 books at the moment to be released in the first 2 quarters of this year. So there is little things, but they're more kind of, I don't know if I call them books. They're more of, I tend to, in the last kind of few weeks, a lot of friends have been calling me about a variety of advice. So not just on delivery, but on like moving jobs and how do they know they're in the right career? How do you even ask for a pay rise, for example? And I tend to be the point of knowledge for those people. So I'm experimenting with maybe like practical guides to that. So, it is something I'm actively going in. I think it's taken me up to now to kind of have my own opinion and also experience to say something. I think trying to say you're a thought leader in my early 20s would have been, you could have said it, but might not have had much cred. So, I feel like I'm at a point where I can start to do a little bit more of that. And certainly, I've been pushing for story point in bugs, which you saw that talk on for a while, and that seems to get a kind of interesting reaction. And there's other process things behind the scenes that I'm kind of pushing for, BA should be more involved in X, Y, and Z. So, and also, I feel like if you're going to call yourself a thought leader, it actually challenges me to think. Sometimes you get a bit lost in delivery by you're in another stand-up, you're in another retrospective, you're in another meeting, you're doing some more story points, you're refreshing the same report for the same people, slightly different decision potentially, but it can get a little bit repetitive. So challenging yourself to think a little bit more leadership-wise, I guess, is one of my kind of like 2021 goals, and see how it goes.
Oh, absolutely, and I'll be watching with interest.
Thanks.
But where can people come and connect with you if they want to learn more about some of the things that you have been thinking about, or just connect and share stories with you in general?
Yeah, I mean, probably the best place at the moment is LinkedIn. So I haven't got like a personal website and stuff like that. So if you add me on LinkedIn, I think it's /James Anthony Rooney is the little special UID thing. I'll accept most connection requests, apart from those trying to sell me Scrum Master courses. Please, no, thank you. I don't believe it's a good spend of £3,000. Apart from that, people reach out to me, and actually off the back of kind of the talk you mentioned before, I had really a lot of interesting conversations with a lot of interesting people. So it is actually good. So please feel free to reach out and disagree with anything I said or agree. I'd love to hear why and understand.
It's always good to get different opinions and roll them all up into one. So I'll make sure we put that into the show notes so people can have at you. Well, that's been a fantastic chat. Thanks for spending the time, and obviously we'll keep in touch and hopefully watch your thought leadership career come on leaps and bounds in 2021. But for now, thanks for coming on.
No problem. Thanks.
Thanks for listening. As ever, it's been my pleasure to have your attention, and I hope you found the episode interesting and inspiring. If you want to listen to more inspiring conversations with passionate product people, you can find us on the podcast app of your choice or onenightinproduct.com, that's night with a K, for interviews and insights with a wide range of guests covering all aspects of product management. That's it for me for now, but until next time, thank you and good night.